Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder here in the Oklahoman studios. Joining me as always, Dale Denwalt from the Capitol, Justin Wingerter from the Federal Government Beat, and we are just a few days away from the big primary elections here in Oklahoma. A variety of races to take a look at, including a medical marijuana state question that we'll be talking about a little bit later in today's episode. But let's start with the candidates that we're going to see on the ballot. And Justin, let's start at the federal level here. What kind of drama, if any, are we expecting on Tuesday night?
Well, I've been out with the candidates this week in the 5th Congressional District, mostly the Democratic candidates there. That's the district we're sitting in right here. That's most of Oklahoma County, Pottawatomie, and Seminole counties as well. A real interesting Democratic race there. We've talked about it a lot on the show. 6 candidates on the Democratic side hoping to challenge Steve Russell. I've been with the candidates for this week, and one interesting dynamic is this immigration issue. This is, I think, heading into the summer, Republicans plan to talk about the economy. Unemployment is low, the stock market is high, et cetera, et cetera. Democrats expected to talk about education and health care, 2 big issues, obviously, for Oklahoma Democrats here. And then the federal government started, putting children in cages, frankly, down in the southern border. And that has changed the dynamic a little bit. This immigration issue has come up a lot. On both sides. We've seen the congressional delegation here in Oklahoma point out where they disagree with the president. Russell himself gave a really impassioned speech last night on the House floor, which is unusual. Russell's not someone to speak out a whole lot on this issue. Well, he does speak out on this issue. Yeah. He's not one to give a lot of floor speeches. Yeah. But he is a pretty moderate guy on immigration, even though he's conservative on just about every other issue. So this has been an interesting issue that the candidates have had to kind of adapt to very quickly. This is something that just popped up in the last couple of weeks. But otherwise, the Democrats are certainly preparing for Tuesday. It's a big night for them. We'll see if that field gets winnowed down to 2. Kendra Horn believes that she can win outright on Tuesday. Which,
you get 50 plus 1% to be able to get
that. By the Oklahoma election rules, you need 50 plus 1 to avoid a runoff in August. And even with 6 candidates, Kendra Horn feeling pretty confident right now. She's by far the best organized. She has by far the most money, more than 4 times as much money as the other candidates combined on the Democratic side. So that she does seem to be very confident heading into Tuesday. All the candidates are feeling pretty good. But you have some first-time candidates who have just kind of recapping things. I've been talking to them about what they've learned and what it's like out there, and they've seemed to feel content going into Tuesday, but we'll see what happens. I would guess, my prediction has always been that there will be a runoff with 6 candidates, but Horn believes that she can win outright and get 50 plus 1.
Yeah, well, and that, winning outright would be important for her because you don't have to spend money on a runoff. You can immediately turn towards November, and I don't know that I don't know that the 5th district is a, it's definitely not a toss-up seat. It leans Republican, but there's some talk in this political climate, and for a variety of other factors that we've talked about on the show before, that this may be a seat that she can be competitive in and challenge Russell, and it bodes a lot better for her if she's able to really start that campaign this Wednesday instead of having to wait till late August.
This was something we talked to Representative Virgin about last week. How much does it help to avoid a runoff and avoid a competitive primary, I think is how we phrased it at the time. Right now, I would say it doesn't hurt to just keep running in a primary. It's a very polite primary, I would say. The Democrats are not going after each other too much in the 5th district, and so it hasn't hurt. If you're a Democrat running so far in the primary, you've basically been doing what you would do in any election, door to door, trying to get your name out there, running ads, stopping by cafes and having coffee with people, whatever it takes. Whether you're running in a primary or a general election, I don't think they've acted very one way or the other. So far it hasn't really hurt her, but it would certainly benefit any of the Democrats if they can skip the runoff and go straight to focusing on Russell for the next few months and until November. So yeah, we'll see Tuesday night.
Yeah, well, in a race like this, it's always the issue of the day is what you're going to have to answer to. And you talked about immigration being that today. I remember almost a year ago we were talking about health care, and who knows what the issue is going to be in November. And obviously we got to get past the primaries first. But it's interesting that right now we're talking about immigration because, as you said, Congressman Russell has been fairly moderate on this issue. And I remember even during Trump's campaign, he was always a supporter of Trump once he got the nomination. But on some of his rhetoric with immigration, Russell, didn't shy away from calling out the president. And I think a lot of that is his own personal experience. I believe he's got 2 adopted daughters. I could be wrong, but I know he's got some adopted children. He served overseas, and so he kind of will often, draw on that military experience, his adopted children, his faith, as why he's, maybe a lot more moderate on immigration issues than you would traditionally see from a member of Congress with the conservative chops that he has.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that immigration is an issue that the Democratic nominee necessarily wants to be the hot issue of the day going into November, and depending on what it looks like and how it shapes out. I mean, immigration is kind of a complex
how much
issue.
voters know where Russell stands. I mean, if you know where Russell stands, yes, he's moderate on immigration, and you're not going to be able to attack him much on that issue. If you don't know where Russell stands, and Russell does not have the best name recognition in the district. He hasn't been there that long. He's a sophomore, and he's not someone who's out in front of the press, in front of cameras a whole lot. He doesn't give a lot of speeches, like I mentioned earlier. So if you don't know where Russell stands and you link him to the president, the separation policy has generally been pretty unpopular. We haven't had polling here in the district, but nationwide it's been pretty unpopular. And so Russell does run the risk of being linked to an unpopular policy here, even if he doesn't support it, if he doesn't do a good job of getting out there and making clear where he disagrees. And like I say, I think he tried to do that last night with a pretty lengthy and a pretty emotional, powerful floor speech on the House floor last night.
Yeah, he's done that before. He's seen refugees firsthand.
Yeah.
And when the whole Syrian refugee issue cropped up a couple of years ago, he came out front and gave a speech on that as well. Surprised a lot of people with his general opposition to what the administration was wanting to do with the Syrian refugees. And I think if people remember that, they'll certainly understand where he stands on the separation issue.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think in a district like CD5 here in Oklahoma, which would probably be the one, probably the least conservative of the 5 districts, but still pretty conservative. If you're a Republican candidate for Congress or the congressman, you probably don't have to support the president as strongly as you would in a more competitive purple district. I mean, no one's going to question Russell's loyalty to the president for the most part. So if he wants to come out, I mean, we've seen that with Langford as statewide senator, or U.S. senator representing the entire state, come out and said, I don't agree with the president's rhetoric here. I mean, he probably feels safe in a place like Oklahoma because no one's going to question your loyalty to the president. On the flip side, if you're the Democrat trying to compete, you probably aren't going to be as quick to criticize the president as you may be, and once again, a more purple district somewhere else in the country. I'm not to say that Horn is going to, whoever the Democratic nominee is going to just, praise the president. And I'm sure, she has, and I'm sure she will criticize the president going forward. But what's going to be really fascinating to me, I know we're kind of getting ahead of the primaries, is what does the national race for Congress look like? What's that tone look like? Are we going to be hearing a lot more attacks on the president? Is impeachment going to be something that's going to be brought up? Whatever the national strategy is for Democrats, I just don't know that it's an automatic playable strategy here in a district like CD5 or the state as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, this district is, every district's a little different, and we've certainly talked about before that what happens nationally does not always happen here. This is different. This is a very red state, and so yeah, certainly that would be something to keep in mind.
Yeah, well, we'll be watching those results. We know that you'll be, in the newsroom, maybe some of those parties closely watching that. Dale, I think you on election night are taking a close look at the House race, right?
That's right.
Or the race for House.
Yeah, looking at all the races across the state. I want to be drilling down on a few of those, keeping an eye on them. The ones that we've learned maybe where the incumbent might be in trouble, or where there's been a lot of negative ads, or a lot of a really contested race for that House seat. I know this weekend I'm writing about 3 House races in the Tulsa area that are the subject of an out-of-state PAC, super PAC, that's spending money against Republican incumbents. All 3 of these Republicans voted against the tax increase, and the campaign is being led. The formation papers for the super PAC are from a Republican strategist, a Republican sort of election services, the kind of guy you go to when you want to file papers of a secret organization like a super PAC. We don't know yet who is behind this money spending. We don't know exactly how much money is being spent. I don't think it's a whole lot, because it's just targeted to those 3 House districts in the Tulsa area. But they, someone is trying to get these Republican incumbents out of office. And certainly these are Republicans who have been somewhat of a thorn in the side of the Republican majority since they've been in office.
Yeah, and that's really the big, question when you look at the legislative races on Tuesday night is, are incumbents going to survive? Which normally that wouldn't even be a dramatic question to ask when you look back at the last several election cycles. I mean, the power of the incumbency is pretty strong here in Oklahoma, but this year, I don't know, it seems like it may not be as much.
It hasn't been a tame couple of legislative sessions. You've got the tax increase, you've got the teacher pay issue, you've got the budget shortfalls that have plagued Oklahoma for 3 years, and the budget failures. We're coming back from that now. We're not going to have that issue in the next year or two, I don't think, depending on what the Supreme Court says about the tax recall.
Teacher,
but there are a lot of things that voters can get mad about their legislator or be upset with their legislator. Now, historically, we know from looking at polling data with Congress, people are upset with Congress all the time. People hate Congress, but everybody likes their representative. Everybody likes their senator.
Yeah.
Is that true for here in Oklahoma? Can people see beyond the sort of big block of people that makes up the legislature and find fault with their own state legislator? That's a question we're going to see answered Tuesday.
Yeah, and probably the lens some of those voters may be looking through is specifically that tax vote. The majority of Republicans voted for the tax hikes that funded the teacher pay raise, those tax hikes that are pending that you referenced earlier. And so for some voters, they may have a clear, did you vote for it, did you not? And we see some races where the primary, races between candidates that are for and against, and that is kind of an easy litmus test for some Republican voters. But you're right, it'll be interesting to see. We talked about that voter frustration for the last few years, that it continues to increase. What's it going to look like? And there's some, we'll also get a chance to see, are people wanting more of an outsider, especially with the governor's race. We see some candidates that are running that are really trying to play up that outsider status. I'm taking a look at the Senate races. You do have some incumbents that are facing challengers in that one as well. I think particularly the races that I'm really interested in is Senate District 30, which is the former seat of Senator David Holt, who's now mayor of Oklahoma City, and Senate District 40. These are two seats that Democrats really feel like they could probably flip. And we haven't really talked about it a lot lately, but I mean, when you look at the political storylines of the last couple of years, you look at all these special elections, where, Democrats have been a little bit on a roll, right? I mean, they're not really that close to getting power back or anything like that, but they have flipped a handful of seats over the last several years.
And listen, the more the more Democrats that caucus gets above the threshold to block any kind of revenue raising measure, it's important for them. It makes them more powerful. I think that's the sort of the lowest threshold that they're allowing themselves to get, because if they go below that, then the Republicans can do anything they want, including raise taxes that the Democrats don't want. I don't foresee any kind of tax raise in the future. Maybe on some service taxes that currently aren't taxed. But I'm not even sure that they would need a supermajority to get that. So as long as they stay above that about 27, 26, 27, 28 number, if they get into the mid-30s or even 40 eventually, that's going to make them so much more powerful as a voting bloc, because there are going to be Republicans who peel off of major votes.
Yeah, and they've been called the most powerful minority in America, but really because of the supermajority necessary to increase taxes.
Right.
If we're right that tax increases really aren't going to be a part of the agenda moving forward, coming off this historic tax hike, if those stand, then maybe the power that the Democrats that we've talked about them having in the last couple of years is not as relevant anymore, right? Because then you're talking about simple policy decisions that take just a majority vote. I mean, Democrats have some power when it comes to blocking tax increases, but beyond that, even if they pick up a couple more seats, you're really not looking at the biggest question about how the legislature goes next year is really what kind of Republicans you get in.
Yeah.
Still.
Well, and it's not going to be all about tax increases, because there's a group, a solid core of 15 to 20 legislators who are so far more conservative than sort of the mainline Republican that you see in the House, and they are more often than not going to vote against the Republican majority. And that's where Speaker McCall needs to draw votes from the Democrats on votes like that. And that's when you get horse trading.
Yeah. We also obviously the big, probably spotlight's going to be on the gubernatorial race on the Republican side. We've talked a lot about that. In fact, I'll put a plug in now this weekend. The Oklahomans Dave Morris and Chris Castile put together this great documentary, about 20-minute documentary, just with our coverage of the gubernatorial race as a whole, but a lot of it's focused on the Republican race, which is where there's a lot of drama. And it's been an interesting race, and once again we've got really three top candidates in Cornett, Lamb, and Stitt that are vying for two spots. It's an act of musical chairs, and one of those three is going to be on the outside looking out, or on the outside looking in.
It's one of the more intriguing races, namely because you have political novice in Stitt. You've got Mick Cornett, who is not a statewide politician, and Todd Lamb, who seems to have been the heir apparent for the last 8 years.
Mm-hmm. Who a few months ago was really trying to distance himself from the Capitol.
Yeah.
Probably still has a little bit, but today in the Oklahoman, Castile's a story with the headline, something along the lines of, Lamb is really trying to play up his experience. So it's kind of a delicate balance for him, because he doesn't necessarily want to be blamed for the movement out of the Capitol that has a lot of voters frustrated, but at the same time, he's trying to really leverage himself as the most experienced person in the race.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to watch. Obviously, the Oklahoman at newsok.com will have complete election coverage throughout the day. Check out that documentary. It airs on Sunday. There's already a trailer that you can find at newsok.com. Some good stuff. We'll continue to have some stories. We also have the medical marijuana state question. After a quick break, I'm going to be joined by Bud Scott, who's with the pro-medical marijuana group, to talk a little bit about what their thoughts are going in to that state question. But real quick, we've talked about this as being a slightly favorite to pass, but in the last couple of weeks we've seen quite a bit of money spent in opposition to this.
I've talked to pollsters about this issue, and when you do polling early, and you find out that a particular issue has a lot of wide support, in that case the question is in a vacuum, meaning that there's people outspoken for a particular measure, there may not be any opposition that you've seen. And in the absence of opposition, you tend to get higher numbers in favor of something. So as the No campaign began spending money and putting ads out and having a press conference, you're going to start seeing them dig into that approval rating. And I've talked to some folks recently who think that there's still a pretty good chance that it'll pass. It's not going to pass with like 75% of the vote, but they're fairly confident that it's going to come to pass. And even if it doesn't, the legislature might decide to come back and try medical marijuana themselves.
Yeah, well, you're right. A lot of things can change in the last couple of weeks. I'm reminded of the state question on the penny sales tax for teacher pay raises in 2016.
Right.
Several weeks out, it had a 60% plus favorability from voters. It ended up failing, and the last couple of weeks before that election, you saw a lot of those anti-ads come out. They do have an impact amongst voters, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. So, well, let's ask Bud Scott about that on the other side of the break as we focus on the medical marijuana question. Thanks so much, Justin and Dale. We'll be following your coverage on election night at News OK. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back here on Political State. Hello and welcome back to Political State from the Oklahoman. I'm Ben Felder. Joining me in studio for this second segment is Bud Scott, Executive Director of New Health Solutions, a group that is advocating for State Question 788, the medical marijuana state question that'll be on the ballot this Tuesday, trying to push that through. And Bud, I want to ask you, I want to get into some of the details of this issue here in a moment. We've talked on this episode about this state question, and it seems like from polls we've seen and just talking to other people who are observing this issue, that it's likely to pass, or at least there's majority support for it. But we were just talking earlier in this episode that there's been state questions before that have had that support, and then those final last couple of weeks, the anti-ads start flying, and it can really change opinions. We've seen that this week. There's been a lot of opposition ads running against this question. I'm just kind of curious, with less than a week out, what's your mindset? What's your expectation come Tuesday?
Well, first of all, I mean, just to clarify, in New Health Solutions Oklahoma, we're the trade association that represents the industry, Oklahoma businesses across the board, whether we have attorneys, physicians, chemists, pharmacists, agricultural specialists that are all part of our organization, and we're advocating for the responsible and timely implementation of a medical marijuana program here in Oklahoma. Obviously, that starts with approving State Question 788, which isn't perfect, but it's the best step that we have, the best opportunity we have for the hundreds of thousands of patients in Oklahoma seeking medical relief to have access to these kind of products. So we're pushing this. We recognize that there's issues that we want to fix within it too. And just like any other state question that's statutory in nature and not constitutional, we're proposing that we come back in a special session, address some of the issues that are still needing to be addressed. Now, how do we feel about this right now? I think that according to pretty much every poll except for this poll that was put out by the No Group, there's been anywhere between a 58% and 70% lead by the yes camp over the no camp. Spending $1 million on television in the final 2 weeks is the hallmark of Pat McFerrin, and has done this in several different campaigns. So we're very familiar with these tactics. We think it'll cost us at least 5 points. However, we believe that there's such strong support for this in Oklahoma. I can tell you every single person I speak with supports this thing. And I'm just talking about people at the convenience store who bring it up to me, people who see me from being on television and constantly bring this issue up. And it is across the board. It's nonpartisan. It's Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, black, white, Asian, whatever. Everyone's in support of this because they recognize the opportunities that it provides here in Oklahoma. And my organization, we recognize the potential multi-billion-dollar impact that it could have on our economy here in Oklahoma. We believe it's incredibly short-sighted for us to basically say no, because we're still held up on some pretty outdated constructs and ideas of what medical marijuana is. We'd be the 31st state in the country to legalize this. Our largest trade partner and neighbor to the north, Canada, just voted to recreational legalize marijuana. So we haven't seen the sky fall in these communities. We haven't seen reefer badness. We've seen some really positive things. So we encourage it.
Why do you think, and you addressed this a little bit already, but why do you think it is, if the polls that you're looking at are correct and this thing does pass, and if it does pass with, I mean, you said it's been anywhere from the mid 50s to 70s. I mean, if it's in the 60s, you're talking about a pretty decisive victory.
Absolutely.
Or even in the high 50s when it comes to a state question. Why do you feel like there is support in a state like Oklahoma where, from a political outsider, it may be surprising to hear that this is? This is a deeply conservative state. I know you've said you feel like this transcends, partisanship, and most states have adopted similar policies. We wouldn't be the only one to not go with the rest of the country on certain issues. So why is a state like Oklahoma, where some people may be skeptical that it would have that kind of support here, why do you feel like the majority of voters are going to support this on Tuesday?
We have to look at every national poll that's been done in the last year that shows upwards of 90% of those that are polled support the legalization of medical marijuana. So the tipping point has passed on this issue. And I think most people in Oklahoma, whether they're from the business community or whether they're one of those struggling patients, they recognize that Oklahoma needs to get on board before we lose our spot once again and hold up the bottom of the barrel for the rest of the country when it comes to health statistics, when it comes to economic development statistics, when it comes to infrastructure statistics, education. This is an issue that we just don't want to get left behind on yet again. Now, that tips on some of the different demographics here in Oklahoma. I think you've got people who really support this because they have family, they have friends that have either suffered from opioid addiction or that suffer from medical conditions, one of the many that can be treated with a cannabis-related product. They also recognize that this is an opportunity for us to do this when Arkansas, our neighbor, has already legalized medical marijuana. Missouri just voted through their legislature, not through a state initiative, to legalize medical marijuana for a very restricted condition. So we have this already going in place. New Mexico and Colorado have both already legalized medical marijuana. So all but 2 of our neighbors, Louisiana also has done it. They just haven't implemented an actual program. So I think there's just enough people that see, they've traveled to other states, they've recognized that this is having a positive impact, and they see that their friends and family actually need that kind of relief.
Yeah.
So they're in favor of it.
Well, let me ask you about some of the opposition claims and let you have
Absolutely.
a chance to respond to that. There's probably two types of people in Oklahoma that disagree with this, and and some may overlap. You have those who are just they see it as a moral issue; they're not going to support it, and there's probably not much you can do to win over that crowd.
That's right.
I would imagine.
That's right.
The other one, other person that may oppose this, sees this as a slippery slope or dangerous, that there aren't enough restrictions. I know you said that you support the idea of the legislature coming back and maybe putting some more parameters in place. I think of someone like Senator Langford, who's come out against this. He's kind of taken the moral side, saying this is just not what we want for Oklahoma. I saw some ads this week where it shows a picture of Chesapeake Arena with the perception being that people are just going to be lighting up in the seats or something like that.
Which is absurd.
Or that anybody is going to be able to get a prescription. What kind of parameters are in place, and what kind of parameters do you imagine would go in place if this were passed?
Well, first of all, those claims that are made in these ads they stretch the limits of credulity, number one, if they're not just outright lies. The Oklahoma Anti-Smoking Act prohibits smoking of any substance in public. That would include marijuana or marijuana-related products. So that's a bold-faced lie, and they've been called out in most of the media for this. Now, as far as anyone being able to get a license to either purchase through a dispensary or to grow their own, once again, just another lie. You have the very clear requirement in State Question 788 that in order to qualify for a license, a medical cannabis patient license, you have to have the recommendation of a board-certified physician, and that physician has to make that recommendation in their course of treatment and how it is done in a professional manner like they would with any other kind of medicine. So I think it's really interesting that the No campaign has really focused on this effort by condemning our entire medical community, including the veterinarians, which, by the way, today, Joe Howell, the past president of the National Veterinarians Association, has come out and basically said it's just a complete fabrication that veterinarians can prescribe prescriptions for humans. You can't do that as part of your license. So this is just such fear-based, bold-faced lies trying to convince people that veterinarians are going to be able to do this. But once again, it goes back to this tactic of condemning our medical industry. I have faith in our physicians that they are able to make a recommendation on a case-by-case basis between their patient and themselves to identify if using a medical cannabis product would actually be helpful in treating their medical condition. Starting this argument by saying physicians are incompetent and physicians are corrupt, I think, again, just condemns the entire medical industry, not to mention the health department. We all know that the health department went through a pretty severe scandal this year, but after the audit, it turns out they really didn't do much. That really was a shell game being played that many agencies actually play each year, and trying to make sure they have their budget issues looking good on paper. But in all reality, the health department was not that bad. And so the No camp will have you believe that the health department is completely incapable of implementing one of these programs, that it's been done in 30 other states. So they're completely capable of doing this. Now, our organization has already prepared and presented over 376 pages of proposed regulations that would be supplemental to what we see in the skeletal framework of 788. That's how this is done on a state-by-state basis. No one can expect the voters of Oklahoma to go in and vote on hundreds of pages of regulations. It's just not done that way. And to paint that picture that way is really just dishonest. Because any other state question, we'd be going in and voting on a general concept and then fully expecting our legislature and our agencies to go in and make supplemental rules. Now, we've pulled from what we consider to be best practices in the most successful jurisdictions for medical cannabis. Michigan, Arizona, Washington, Colorado, Oregon, they have the best examples of an implemented program. So our recommendations, we say, don't reinvent the wheel here. Let's take what works in these other communities and then build upon it. And so we've already been working with the health department on this. We've been working with leadership in the House and Senate on trying to develop what would be a responsible, timely implementation of this. And that timely issue, I think, is very important, because when the voters of Oklahoma approve this, I think it's important that members of our legislature do not attempt to kick the can down the road for a year or two. And we've seen this happen in other states, where the will of the people is, we want to have legal access to medical marijuana. That's what the people say. And then the legislature comes back around and says, maybe you don't. And we're going to hold this off for 3, 4, 5 years like they've done in Louisiana, for example. There's no need for us to do that there. We believe that we're completely capable, both with our agencies and our stakeholders, to make sure this thing's implemented correctly. There is going to need to be some more time than what's spelled out in 788. We need to have a rulemaking process with the agencies. We do need to go through that. And typically it's about 90 to 120 days for an Administrative Procedures Act rulemaking. And I think anyone who's reasonable recognizes we're going to have to go through that process. But to try to say this wouldn't be implemented for another year, I think would be dangerous.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, as we kind of wrap up here, about, there's always this talk about recreational marijuana versus medical marijuana. I've looked, and there's not really a universal definition, except medical marijuana requires a doctor, right?
That's right.
And that's clearly, we saw earlier this week, the governor said this is essentially recreational marijuana, and it's not, right? I mean,
it's not at all.
So, but let me ask you about the medical part of this, because and I don't say this as a supporter or taking any stance on this, but when I hear about the criticism that there are so loose guidelines on what a doctor could prescribe this for or recommend this for, my thought, I immediately think about pills and opioids.
That's right.
And I've said this before on the show. I've found it shocking in personal experience and just in reporting on the issue how easy it is.
That's right.
We have an issue right now. I know that we're getting off the debate a little bit of medical marijuana and just talking about prescription drugs in general, but we have a culture right now into which there aren't a lot of parameters in terms of what doctors can prescribe. We've seen some maybe abuses of that.
Sure.
So I guess, tell me about what do you think the impact of this will be, in the medical community when it comes to what are the medical needs of Oklahomans that you feel like this state question is going to help address?
Well, you can go to our website, www.newhealthok.com, and we've compiled there every single medical study in the United States, Israel, the United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, that demonstrates the efficacy of this product in treating a whole range of conditions. And so if people want to see that, they can see the demonstrative peer review science that the facts are in here. It's effective. And one of the things that I kind of want to tail on to, talk about the opioid issue. Yes, it's been overly prescribed. It's been a scourge in our nation. I think everyone recognizes this. Now, to compare that, though, to medical marijuana is really inappropriate in my opinion, because medical cannabis, you've never seen, hasn't been an indicator of kidney, liver function failure, death, suicide, overdoses. That just does not happen with this product. So we have the opportunity to introduce a new form of medicine and work with the medical community on figuring out how that's best recommended, how the delivery systems operate, and we stand ready to work with the medical community on this. But we want to be able to provide this to these patients, because in all the states, and we've got a RAND Corporation study that demonstrates this, we have a Journal of American Medicine, internal medicine study, and reports that demonstrate that in states with full-blown medical marijuana dispensaries, there is upwards of a 25% reduction in opioid prescriptions and overdoses. Now, of all the policies that have been recommended to address the opioid crisis, this is the only one that's been demonstrated to work. So whether it's anecdotal or not, it's a weapon that we should be using in our arsenal to address this opioid crisis. And so I would hope that our leaders and our health community, our medical community, would recognize that this is an excellent opportunity and it's a product we should embrace rather than push away. Because once again, to try to compare opioids and cannabis, it's apples and watermelons. Cannabis does not have those side effects that opioids clearly do. There's not a demonstrated just immediate addiction to this product. There's not the fear of death. There's never been a demonstrated incident of death exclusively from cannabis. Never.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting to watch on Tuesday. Obviously, I know you will be when most of Oklahomans vote. Some are already voting. I think that includes you, right? You've got your
my
iVote
voted sticker right here.
I think I caught under your jacket as early voting is underway.
And if I can plug something real quick, so New Health Solutions Oklahoma, we've partnered up with restaurants and bars around the community here in Oklahoma City. We want to encourage people to go vote early and really just participate in democracy. I think way too many people are too apathetic on this issue. And we're not just talking about medical marijuana, we're talking about everything in general. We want people to be more engaged. So there's restaurants and bars across the community that will be offering specials and door prizes, etc. on Saturday, June 23rd. You can go to voteearly2018.com, and it has a list of participating establishments. Just go out there, they'll be offering them to everyone, but they're just really, it's a celebration of voting early.
Yeah, well, we definitely endorse voting here at Political State. So, hey, Bud Scott, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Political State from the Oklahoman. Once again, find complete coverage in the run-up to the elections every day in the Oklahoman. And on Tuesday, News OK will have complete coverage from sun up to well past sundown. For the Oklahoman with Political State, I'm Ben Felder. We'll see you next week.